Good afternoon, everyone, to our Manhattan virtual panel today. We're truly excited to have you here for the state of homelessness and hunger, where we bridge policy and practice. I want to do a quick introduction of myself. My name is Jerry Hippolyte. I'm the Chief of Staff and Head of Government Affairs, Housing Solutions of New York, where we are committed to ending homelessness. Now, first, I really want to start off by saying this series is rooted in a simple but urgent idea that if we're serious about ending homelessness, we have to bring policy, practice, and live reality into the same room. So today, it's really about aligning, it's about grounding the conversation of what's actually happening on the ground, as well as identifying where we can move together faster and more effectively. So really to speak to what's happening in the work that we're doing, I really want to give us the understanding of our complexities as relates to homelessness and hunger. And so the theme of this tour, we started in Staten Island, we made our way to Queens, and now we're here in New York City, is really building bridges and restoring dignity. And this is with intentionality because homelessness and hunger is often really discussed separately, but in practice, they show up together, layered and compounding. And so this conversation is designed to bridge those gaps between housing and food systems, between providers and policymakers, and between what we know and what we need to do. And so we're not here just to describe the problem. Really, we're here to sharpen how we can respond to it. And in Manhattan, and in many ways, sits at the center of urgency. And so, really, to speak to that, I want to speak to why Manhattan, why now? So, Manhattan in of itself presents a very unique contradiction. It's one of the most resource-rich boroughs in the country, yet it continues to see deeply concentrated needs where we're seeing increased pressure in emergency and traditional and transitional housing systems, rising cost of burdens that push individuals into instability, growing overlap between housing insecurities as well as food access challenges. From a system perspective, Manhattan is not lacking services actually, but is struggling in scale, coordination, and access. And that's where this conversation comes in today, because it's critical, because the gaps are not just about resources, they're about how those resources are aligned. And so, just to ground us in some facts, I'll start off by saying, as you can see on the screen, over 100,000 people, including 33,000 plus children, sleep in shelters nightly. As relates to children and families, that's over 67%. In recent years, homelessness in New York City has reached the highest level since the Great Depression. Now, I do know that there's been an influx of asylum seekers and migrants, but that just speaks to going back to scale and coordination. In January of 2026, to speak to specific numbers, over 100,437 people slept in shelters per night. When you break that down and we talk about the 67% of those shelters being members of homeless families, this includes going back to the 33,000 children, 33,217 children. We're really speaking to a really deep-rooted crisis or epidemic that's happening right now. Over 150,000 New York City children experienced homelessness at some point during 2024-2025 school year. These are children that we're talking about. 1.6 million New Yorkers have felt or been in the space of food insecurity. That speaks to 40% of New York City families that can't afford food weekly. One of the great things about this conversation is that we brought together really strong, dynamic individuals from the Children's Village, from um, the Common Pantry, from YMCA, deep-rooted individuals, and of course, even HSNY themselves, to really speak to what's happening on the ground. What are the impacts that we're seeing, and how do we combat that? And so, when we speak to those crises, let's talk about the reality. The reality is that a lot of these issues are structural. These are layered systemic issues that not one person or one problem can fix alone. These are layered institutions that require multiple individuals to create a holistic solution to help solve many. This is not about a person not wanting to have a job or somebody who doesn't have the ability to work. These are cycles of instability that we speak about where we're in a nation where 67% of individuals are typically one job, one traumatic event away from being unhoused themselves. And so when we talk about the reality of the structure, the cycle of instability, that homelessness is not a crisis, it's not a one size fits all, which speaks to the system. Any one missed payment or arrears will lead you into eviction. And that's not the space we want to be as New Yorkers. With that, I want to take this opportunity to really swing it over to our host. But before we bring it to our host, what I want to do, and I'm going to ask our team to build this out, if we can bring out Assembly Member Jordan Wright, who wanted to open us up with a couple of remarks, and then we bring it to our host to speak to the rest of the panelists and lead this conversation forward. So, Assemblymember Wright, if you're in the room.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Just wanted to sneak away from session for a moment to make sure that I was here to tell you all how important the work that you all are doing is. And I want to say it loud and clear. I'm your partner, your conduit, your resource, your ally in all of these journeys that we go on about. I'm eager to introduce, negotiate, and pass legislation, the kind of legislation that some might call controversial. Sign me up. Okay, with pride and conviction because no one in New York State, where billionaires reign and drip coffee costs $8, where rent is so high that it keeps me up at night, where we see so brazenly the contrast of our city streets lined with our brothers and sisters who are housing insecure next to some of the most profitable real estate in America. That's an embarrassment and a stain to our state and our country. It is inconsistent with American values and the ideals that built modern society. History will not look fondly upon those who did not lend a hand. As a legislator, but also as a citizen of the world, I offer both of my hands in this work. Harlem is, and I know I'm biased here, and I'm sure some of you all might agree, is the center of the universe. It has everything that makes the world go round. More corner stores per capita than anywhere else. The Apollo Theater, El Barrio, incredible food that confuses some people, Black pride, Black history, Black power, Black struggles, Black poverty, Black ascension, gentrification, housing insecure men, women, and children, and more food pantries than any one neighborhood should ever need. And yet, they're all running out of products and they're turning folks away. I've met with the men and women who run these essential programs, and they're doing God's work with no money, less money than ever before because of federal ignorance and hatred. They're providing more than just food. They're providing toiletries, haircuts, feminine products, clothing, and so much more. Some make meals at their own dime, and we all know that grocery store costs are unattainably high. So I just wanted to say thank you so much. I'm happy to be here as a partner in this work, and anything I can do going forward in the future, please let me know. Please let my office know. Thank you all so much.
Assemblymember Wright, we cannot thank you enough. Thank you for opening us up and really centering this conversation. With that, I'll swing it over to our moderator for the day, Marley Warren, who's going to really start this conversation. So, Marley, all yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am very honored today to be moderating a panel of such esteemed practitioners, as well as having Assemblymember Wright be available for that wonderful welcome. This is going to be a conversation amongst the folks who are doing the work in the borough. So I'm going to get us started with introductions. This just to set the tone. At any point in time when a question is asked, if you have an opinion or you have something to add, please jump in. This is, yes, we're going to do some round robin style questions, but this is really a conversation amongst the folks doing the work. So with that, I am going to get us started and I'm going to introduce Miss Judy Secon from New York Common Pantry to tell us about herself and the work that she's doing.
Sure. Thank you very much. Happy to be here. And thank you to the Assembly member for all his support. I am the Deputy Executive Director at New York Common Pantry. New York Common Pantry is one of the premier hunger relief organizations in New York City. I use that terminology because we are commonly referred to as emergency feeding providers, but there is nothing emergency about what we do anymore. It is unfortunately too much a way of life and commonality. It is people's constant that they need to visit a food pantry. So at New York Common Pantry, we have brick and mortar pantries. We have mobile pantries. Our headquarters is located in East Harlem in Manhattan. We saw last year We gave out over 11.7 million meals in all of our programming. And in Manhattan, this fiscal year so far, counting just the past 6 months, we have given out about 2 million meals. So we are on track to give out about 10% more than last year. So while people believe that the issues about hunger, which really came to the forefront during COVID, have subsided, they have not in any way, and they've only intensified. Manhattan, which is one of the richest boroughs in the country, experiences tremendous amounts of food insecurity. So there are pockets of wealth, but there are also pockets of extreme poverty. And so when we look at any recovery that people may be talking about, it really only happens in limited neighborhoods.
I'm going to pass this off to Dr. Jeremy Kohomban.
Great. Good afternoon, all. And it's good to have Assemblymember Wright make the introduction. I think he hit on all the key points. Dr. Jeremy Kohomban, I'm the president and CEO of the Children's Village in Harlem, Dowling. We focus in 3 areas: preventing human trafficking, both into the United States and throughout the United States, child welfare, and juvenile justice. 3 populations of children with one mission, and the mission is to get kids back home to family, or in those instances when family is unable or unwilling, to create new family. We've been around for 175 years. 85% of our children return home to family, if not immediate family, to extended family. And about 15% of our children go on to live with amazing foster families or adoptive families. I think the key point I would like to make is that in the United States, social services, whether through charities or government contracts, have kept a lot of people connected and alive, but we haven't done a great job of giving people what's permanent. And in the work that we do, where we work with children, we want to make sure children have what's permanent. And the 3 things that are permanent in all our lives is the people that love us, the education that we get, and if we are lucky enough to live in a safe home. Because the numbers in the United States, we have 70 years of data that tell us one thing: when it comes to second generation predictive value. So when we look at what's happening that could impact second generation success, it is where you live and where you go to school. Where you live and where your children go to school is the most predictive statistic for second generation success. And too many of the children that we work with across New York and even across the country are being denied the opportunity to live in places where you and I would live and to attend a school where the promise of an education is completely fulfilled.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kohomban. At this time, I would like to pass it back over to Mr. Cedric Dew for his introduction.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cedric Dew. I'm the Vice President for the Transitional Housing at the YMCA of Greater New York. We have 2 locations in Manhattan. We serve single men and women in our facilities. And we've been doing, the why, most folks don't know the why actually, its origin is transitional housing. Its origin starts there. And so, we have been in this work providing transitional housing to folks since our conception. And so one of the things that I always want people to know is that there is a commitment to restoring dignity to people who are in transition. It is really important that they understand when they come through our doors that they're not a number, that they are a person. They're someone under circumstances. And there's so many different circumstances today that lead people into homelessness and transition. And I use both terms because they go hand in hand. There are those who transition out of foster care who become homeless as young adults. There are those who are victims of tragedy, are victims of trauma. There are those that are veterans. There are those that are adjudicated. There's so many different types of populations that come through the doors, and they all deserve the same thing: to be respected and to have their dignity restored so they can start their lives and become productive members of our communities.
Thank you. Next, I would like to pass this over to HSNY's own Julie Chisolm.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julie Chisolm, and I am one of the site directors of a single men's facility located in the Bronx, but I also assist with program development and logistics of opening new shelters throughout the city. I have over 30 years of shelter experience, and so I am very pleased to sit on this panel with each and every one of you. I've watched your work throughout the years happen in the community of Manhattan, especially in Harlem. And so I'm grateful to be on this panel. But one of the things that I truly see is that, and I agree with each of you, we have a situation going on right now where we have more people who are experiencing housing insecurity, food insecurity, and our biggest issue is not having affordable housing. And so we talk about permanency. I get it, but if we can't get the people to have the necessary tools to support themselves once they get into the community, that is when our outside service providers come into play. Our clients are going to keep coming into the shelters as a revolving door, and our job is to stop that. At HSNY, we want to give the compassionate care and the wraparound services needed to help these clients come out of shelter, get into housing, and to be able to be self-sufficient on the outside, even if that means tapping into the resources in their community. Thank you.
Thank you. And last, I would like to have Assemblymember Wright intro himself and talk about what's going on in his office and what you really want the audience to know about yourself and the work that you do.
I want to jump in for the panelists real quick. Marley, Assemblymember Wright is going back and forth between the chambers, so we're going to have his legislative director, Emma Ford, jump in, so she'll be speaking.
Thank you so much, Emma. Welcome. And I'm going to give you a moment to get yourself situated, and I'm going to start us off with our first round of questioning. Really want to talk about the landscape of Manhattan. And this is going to be an open question I'm going to have each of you answer, thinking about from your vantage point, what feels most urgent about homelessness and hunger in Manhattan right now? And I'm going to have Miss Secon get us started with this conversation.
Sure, thank you. So what feels most urgent about this moment is that I guess it's not a moment. Like I said earlier, it's unfortunately a way of life for so many people that they cannot afford housing, they cannot afford healthcare, they cannot afford the basic necessities. And so we're here to help them with food. As everyone knows, because it happens to all of us personally, you're hungry, sort of everything else goes out the window. You're thinking about feeding your kids who may be hungry. These things take precedence and prominence and cause great mental anxiety, health issues, all kinds of complicating factors. So the fact that this is not something that people are experiencing in a crisis, are experiencing during a moment of being out of work. It is something most of the people who visit food pantries are working families. So they are doing everything that they need to do right to support their families, to support their kids, but they still can't afford basic necessities like food. And so it feels urgent that we need to address this in a major way. We need to make sure that going to a pantry doesn't become a burden for somebody, that people are working, that people have kids in school, that people have lifestyles, and that getting the necessities like food shouldn't become another burden for them. For many people, walk in a supermarket, walk in a bodega, get food whenever they want. So one of the things that food pantries right now are doing is bringing the food to where people are, meeting people where they are. So developing mobile programming that gets food to schools, to early childhood education centers, to after school programs, to churches, so that as part of people's normal life, they can pick up the food as well. And this has been one of the more innovative models. People do all kinds of different models. There's some home delivery for elders, people who can't get out. There's working with healthcare facilities. But we need to figure out a way to make food more accessible and also easier for people to get. Love to tackle the bigger problems and the persistent problems of why people can't afford food. But right now, we need to understand the moment that we're in and that they can't. And how do we make this? How do we really work with people's needs and what they need and make sure the food that we're giving out not only meets their needs through choice and through other kinds of being able to provide fresh produce and that, but also the means of which we get it to them have to be reflective of the people we serve.
Thank you. Mr. Du, I saw you come off mute, so I'm going to ask you, what do you feel is most urgent about homelessness right now in Manhattan?
I would probably say that, gentrification has become a really, really big component of why we see so many displaced people. If you combine the fact that the cost of living in Manhattan skyrocketed, and people who historically, I've worked and lived in that community in Harlem and Lower East Side throughout my career. And one of the things that I've seen is that, people can't afford to live there. Even if they got vouchers, it's difficult for people to be able to afford to live in Manhattan. And Harlem has become upper, they call it Northern Harlem now. And when they do things like that, what it does is it compromises the ability for the folks who historically would have been there. We know what Harlem was 20, 30 years ago, even before then. We know that people can't live in Harlem now because they can't afford to. And then the limited amount of housing is another factor. The fact that that the population is in ways growing, but there's not enough places for people to go. And then also to the landlords. The landlords oftentimes, when they see someone who's been in transition, been in the homeless system, they're reluctant to rent them. They don't see them in the same vein they do as someone who maybe comes from somewhere else, who now, maybe has a track record because they lived in another state, but they come here and now they can just move right in, versus folks who've been here all their lives and oftentimes cannot find, adequate housing. And I think the other piece is too, is that, we're sort of in a cultural revolution. So we're seeing the population of homelessness drop. Used to be this population was, 40 and older. Now the population is 22, 23, 24, up to the mid 30s, because they're getting younger because of so many things, whether it be the LGBTQ community, which struggles with being accepted oftentimes, even in employment to deal with housing, or whether it be young people who, parents say, listen, if you don't get a job, you got to get out. And so there are a lot of young people coming into the homeless systems. The disconnect that happens with our educational system that creates these situations. So there are a number of challenges that created, but I would say the number one is gentrification and our inability to be able to afford to live in communities that we historically have.
Thank you. That really resonates, especially when you're a New Yorker and you see how the landscape changes and you can't afford to be a part of that landscape. As you were speaking about children and the aging down of folks experiencing homelessness, I'm going to ask Dr. Kohomban to give his input on what you're hearing in your work with what's the urgency around homelessness and hunger.
Thank you. I think there are two urgent matters, and we've alluded to one. I think Cedric made a good case describing what we're seeing with homelessness. But we also last year had 150,000 of our students who identified as homeless. That's a huge number. To be homeless also means to be somewhat transient, right? Homeless families don't have the predictability of staying in one place. And in our work, it is not unusual for us to work with young people who have transitioned from 2 to 3 neighborhoods and from 2 to 3 schools before they come to us, which means they've lost their peer group. They don't have a community that they'll graduate with anymore. They've lost time in class, and their confidence is hurt at every point during this transition. Now, I would add to that, and going back to the comments that have been made about homelessness, we absolutely need to build more homes, but we also need to start talking about what we build and where we build. We cannot continue to repeat history of building affordable homes that are high density, of marginal quality, in the very same burdened neighborhoods that our families have had to navigate generation after generation. And they do it well, but here's the challenge in many of those neighborhoods. Our young people are not always safe, and our children don't always have access to decent education. I'm not even suggesting great education. And we see parents struggle all day long because they get it, right? They know if my child can go to a good school, a decent school, where there's attention, good curriculum, after-school programs, and safety, they know that that will have a generational impact. But depending on where you are situated, getting to that promise is really difficult. And I think it is time for us to think about a new history. This is not just about building affordable housing. This is about building affordable housing in neighborhoods that have excluded affordability, and making sure that we are also building integrated housing, because I can tell you, our young people do better when they live amongst me. My children do better when they live among the children that we serve. We all do better when we live together, but we continue to segregate certain types of families in certain neighborhoods, in certain types of homes. And that is not giving us the second generation impact we want.
Thank you so much. There's a lot to unpack in that. And while we think about that, Ms. Chisolm, where are you seeing the urgency in this moment?
Well, I do want to thank Dr. Jeremy and Cedric for everything that they said, because all of that is a component of what's happening. It's not just one thing that's impacting the community. There are numerous things that are impacting the community. When you talk, Dr. Jeremy was talking about education. And so when we talk about the fact that years ago in Harlem, it was easier for you to bus your child out of the district to go to school instead of for the Department of Education to upgrade the level of education that was given in the community schools. So we have these things where we have to bring these communities together. We want affordable housing. We need it. I work in a shelter for men, and I think last year was the largest number of young men that I had under the age of 25 that I've had in my experience at one time. Most of them being kicked out of their homes or coming out of foster care with no other services to connect to. So that's why when we start talking about it, there's no one here has said anything wrong, because there's no one answer to what needs to happen to help the marginalized get ahead. While affordable housing is important, one of the things that we have a problem with is that even when we had affordable housing, every time a voucher goes up, the rent goes up. The landlords market of people who work that don't qualify for a voucher out of marketable housing because the vouchers then go up and continue to go up. A two-bedroom voucher is $2,000 and change, almost $3,000. Where's a working family going to have $3,000 just to have a two-bedroom apartment? So while affordable housing is definitely a part of the biggest issue, I do want to say that wraparound services for those to get out of the shelter and stay out of the shelter is extremely important. But it's a citywide pandemic. I just want to say that. Because if we're not educating our kids in the neighborhoods in which they live in, then we still fail them. So if, like you said, we have to integrate the communities, how do we do that? Because with gentrification, what we're doing is moving the current community out. So then the community is starting to change and transform into something else. And I think those are some of the battles that we fight. We're trying to get people to move out of shelter and find them affordable housing in communities that they will thrive in, And so.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. That I mean, the answers all resonate and you see a common thread. Judy, I'm going to pass it back to you and then I'm going to have you, Emma, follow up. When we think about this landscape and the sense of urgency, where are some of those bottlenecks, that common pantry, Judy, that you see experiencing as we try to get these services out to folks?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting question because the current political landscape has made it extremely difficult. Because we know that things like SNAP and SNAP benefits are extremely important for people. It's not food pantries who do it alone. It is we do it in conjunction with benefits. SNAP provides 9 meals to every food pantry's 1 meal. So at this point, because there have been such dramatic changes, we're sort of fighting an uphill battle here to be able to keep up, to be able to provide the food to people that they need when they are facing such a changing landscape and anxiety. It's also for us in terms of how people view emergency food providers. They do not, and that's why I use the word again, emergency food providers, they do not see this as something that is an integral part of the social safety net, like housing or education or healthcare. Food pantries were historically volunteer-run, religious-based organizations that ran on volunteer power and ran on donations. And so there are not mechanisms in the government to provide funding for what we currently do right now. Now, us and the other larger food pantries, the food banks, City Harvest, we alone moved 10 million pounds of food this past year. You don't do this without having a structure, an infrastructure, a trained staff in place who can make these things happen. So for us, it's sort of constantly having to rise to the occasion to meet our participants' needs. We are very focused on responding to their needs, but not always having the supports that we need because we're sort of the afterthought of the social safety net in the city of New York. And for us, that creates problems because you can't then, if we don't know from year to year where our funding's coming to, you can't plan appropriately. You can't build the infrastructure that you need to do this. We work with so many partners, and when you're talking about providing supportive housing, I think having a food pantry as part of that housing is really important. I mean, if you could provide pantries in housing so that is something that people's needs could get met, but we don't necessarily have mechanisms that allow us to do that funding wise or to think about doing things on a different scale or level.
Thank you. Ms. Forbes, do you have anything that you would like to add around policy and what's going on?
Hi. Sorry, the Assemblyman had to run back over in time to cast his vote for our budget extender. But this has been illuminating and helpful. Hello, Common Pantry. Thank you so much. We've spoken to so many different food pantry folks this session, and the governor is obviously moving forward on some additional food pantry funding, which is great, but legislatively, I want to start thinking really creatively on how we can just get the food to the folks, especially with the numbers that you guys have all reiterated about young people. Access should be the easiest part. So I would love and will reach out to folks independent of this about creative legislative ways we could do this, from voluntary donations. If you go to any cultural institution in Harlem, you go to the Studio Museum, check this box, round up goes to the food pantry, to putting the onus on schools to get the food and the children in the same place easily, to free transportation to pantries or places where there's emergency food, completely free, not half off, but the subway, swipe your barcode, this is where you're going. Just easier access, cut some of the deterrents out that we can do legislatively, to increase the access and the amount of money that these folks are running on, meaning the food pantries. But yeah, we're open to all solutions or ideas. But I think we need to tackle this in a multi-pronged way. Obviously, it's complex and the demographic is changing, and it's hard to understand and treat and service. So we got to do everything we can. And thank you all. You're experts. You're excellent. And we need you to tell us how to help fix this, and we'll do the work, and don't hesitate.
Thank you so much, Ms. Forbes. I'm going to get us started on our next round of questioning, and I want to talk about the intersectionality of the work that supports both hunger and homelessness. So I'm going to start with Dr. Jeremy, and I would love to know, when you are addressing housing instability and with the youth that you serve, how frequently does food insecurity appear alongside that? I think you're still on mute.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Food insecurity is a constant presence with a lot of our young people. That doesn't mean, at least in our case, that they go hungry. I think part of the role that we have to take, and we certainly take that at Children's Village, is that we have to step in and be the prudent parent, right? It's not enough to tell a young person who needs to go to school, or especially the young adults that go into our apartments, to say, hey, listen, you got to hold down a job. We would like you to, take some college classes. And, oh, by the way, you also got to go to the food pantry. That is not what a parent would do. So I think prudent parenting requires that we step in and make sure that young people, that the burden placed on them to take the steps towards success, right? The thing we want our young people to do is not to live on benefits and seek more benefits for the rest of their life. That is a trap. That is a trap. We want our young people to aspire to be like all of us at this panel, because that management of their emotions, right? When you're hungry, it's easier to get angry and to be irritable. So providing food to young adults, especially the ones that are living in our apartments, is our priority. We should not, and we are lucky to have some amazing providers, right? Like the Common Pantry and others that step in to help us. But it's our job to make sure that their apartments have food.
Thank you. Ms. Chisolm, I know that this is an intersectionality at Housing Solutions as well. Can you talk about how that looks, how food security appears alongside homelessness in the clients that you serve?
Well, definitely on our families with children side, those apartments that we have are what we consider tier 2, where they're actually doing their own cooking. And so one of the things that HSNY has done was develop a food and nutrition department. And so we have a pantry. It's like going to the supermarket. You go in, you learn about nutrition, you learn about health, you learn about healthy ways of cooking, and you can shop for yourself. But for our other sites, we actually bag up groceries and take them to those sites to help those families that have cooking facilities to be able to provide meals for themselves. And it's real important because they say stretch the dollar. Well, it's really hard, and food prices are going up. Quality food, fresh food is not always readily available in some of the neighborhoods that we serve. And so our food pantry helps us to deliver that to our families with children facilities. For our single facilities, we provide 3 meals a day plus a snack. But we also give them information for neighborhood soup kitchens and other places that they may go if they find themselves in the community and hungry at a time before they get back to the site.
Mr. Du, I'm going to ask you the same question. With the 600 beds that you oversee, how does food insecurity go alongside homelessness?
Well, it goes to the first thing that came to mind was quality of life for everybody. The population we're talking about is in the community. They're not on some island someplace away from everyone else, right? And therefore, when you think of quality of life for everyone in that community, when you put food insecurity on the burden of someone who's got trauma, who's dealing with some of the other issues our populations are dealing with, you immediately affect crime. You immediately affect panhandling. You immediately affect the behavior that individuals will exhibit as soon as they walk out of even a YMCA. The fact that they get meals at the Y, from the agencies that provide the services, meaning when they walk out the door, that's one less thing they're going to go out into the streets and potentially try to create financial, finances for. Full belly will allow you to think about the other things that are important. And it's interesting because I love when we talk about the word, when we use the term food insecurity, they go hand in hand with financial insecurity and the third one being safety. The safety factor that happens to our community, the individuals and how they feel about when they walk out, do they feel as if they have support? Because that is the first, we talk about the first tier of needs is food, the second tier of needs being shelter. And then the third part being someone that cares. And so oftentimes when we see the food insecurity, you often will see the behaviors that come along with that have a real solid impact on our communities. And so when I talk to development corporations and groups who ask the question, why are these people in my community? Why do you have to be here? I say, because this is your community. And therefore, you need to understand that they're part of the community, and we need to provide them with the services that they need in order so that the community is better. This is not one or the other, because when you talk about veterans and like I said, young adults, and you talk about senior citizens, and you're talking about women who've experienced trauma, and you talk about folks who've gone through substance abuse, you're talking about so many different populations of folks that are coming right back. These systems aren't releasing them into very specific little buckets. They're putting them in the community. And so when you think about the fact that most of the people you'll talk to say, well, I don't really want to go in the shelter system. It's not safe. That's what you hear so much of. They'd rather be on the street and panhandle than to go into a system. So if we wanted to really affect the system, let's see if we could go into the shelters and change the culture so that people feel a connection to the environment long enough to transition out. So that question of food and housing go hand in hand with safety.
Thank you. Before I get into the next round of questions, I do want to invite the audience. If you all have questions that you would like to ask the panelists, please do so in the chat, and we'll make some time at the end of this conversation to have those questions answered by folks. As we've been talking around the challenges that we're facing currently in Manhattan, there's a lot of room for us to work together, the different agencies, working with our elected officials. And I would love to hear from you all. Where do you see collaboration going well right now? Where are we still operating in silos? And what investments, would most strengthen the prevention pipeline, right? Like, we are all dealing with folks once they've gotten into crisis, but what does that look like to have those preventative measures in place? And again, I'm going to ask everyone to just jump in with this. I would love to hear from all of you around these things, where we can collaborate where we're doing it well, where we have silos, and what does prevention look like. To get us started, I'm going to go back to Miss Secon first, and then if no one jumps in, I'm going to call on y'all.
That's a tough question, but I think that's actually a really good point, that where we see people in this process is when they're already in need, and how do we get to the point before they get in need. And I think, it does take us all working together. I think it's recognizing the individual, it's understanding all of the things that are impacting them and their state. It takes, for me, you realize how much time and human intervention this takes, and how all of our staffs are so invested in the people that they serve, and understanding, and they have to be. And I think people don't understand that about people who provide this kind of care, is that, it takes time to meet with a person, to develop trust, to have that person really be able to talk to you about all of their issues, to be able to really reach out and find the right people and partners who do this work well. I kind of think it starts with a recognition of what the field needs, how we need to support our people who do this work, who are seldom supported, and how, we need to make sure that we're creating those opportunities like this for us to understand about each other's work, to be able to look at a person and say, wait, I can meet their food need, but I can't meet these other needs, but I know people who can, and I'm willing not to be, I don't want to be territorial. I want to do what's best for that person and figure out how we're going to all work together and make this work. But it's recognizing how hard that can be, how emotionally draining that can be for so many of our staff. You're sitting there and you're hearing about these overwhelming needs that people have. And I think we also have to recognize how we support our staff and how we develop them and how we make this work. We're all in this work because we find rewards. We believe this is the right thing to do. How we sort of change a mindset so that people feel that this kind of work is the work, we can all come to. And it deserves, recognition. It deserves support. It deserves, these people are heroes who do this work. But unless you can bring the people into this work to do that, with all of that, given all the other pressures that we've been talking about in the city, to make decent wages, to support your families, to do all that, we kind of can't get there.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in. I think that, when I think of some agencies that I think are critical, because we have to cut off the pipeline to the problem if we're going to think preventive. So when we think of agencies like ACS, Criminal Justice System, and the Department of Aging, those are three critical pipelines. ACS, so many young people get placed in the system and then they just age out of the system. And that lends, and I would say that if you take a disconnected child and make them a disconnected teen, they become a disconnected adult. And all of those things lead you right into homelessness. All those things lead you right into the same systems that we're talking about trying to affect. On the other side, we don't have enough services to meet the needs of our aging population. We're now the upside down pyramid of aging. Inflation is really catching up to people, and folks are ending up in the system because they just can't afford to keep up. And so that's such an important variable. And the criminal justice system, which is the other pipeline, hats off, because recently I've been approached, regarding individuals who just have bench warrants, who don't need to be in Rikers Island, so they get further criminalized and then become, again, the population of homelessness of tomorrow. So if we worked with the agencies that kind of create the pipelines to what becomes homeless, then I think we have a better chance of doing more preventive work, right? It just affords us the opportunity to cut it off at its knees and not have it, continue to grow, because the population, there's certain other things that are going to create homelessness now. We know that we've seen Sandy and Katrina. A lot of folks don't realize how much homelessness was created from from disasters. So if you throw disasters on top of socioeconomic issues, you know, the population jumped from about 80,000 in New York City to well over 150,000 in just one major flood. So it's those kind of things that we have to think about to cut it off at the pipeline in the areas that we can.
I'll pick up where Cedric left off. When it comes to young people, cutting off the pipeline, stopping the pipeline, and preventing often comes down to making sure that kids are not separated from family and growing up in a system. It doesn't matter what the system is. It could be group homes, child welfare, juvenile justice, homelessness. Systems don't build young people. Systems don't allow children to grow up with love. So when we work with young people that do not have family and age out, their journey is so much more difficult than when we have done the work, and sometimes it takes a few lucky breaks, and this child is now growing up with a family, either their own 85% of the time or 15% of the time, with someone, amazing New Yorkers that open their doors, their hearts, their lives, and their families, often to teenagers. And you see the change. It's dramatic. So that's one place where we can prevent, is make sure that kids don't grow up in systems, that they grow up with people that love them. And in this city, there are lots of people that step up to give love. We are very lucky. Two, I think we need to also look at education. Last year, New York City Public Schools reported that 300,000 children were chronically absent. In many of these cases, these were teenagers who just stopped going to school. Look, when kids give up, they become part of the system. And we can do something. We know the numbers. These are not all schools, right? All schools have some chronic absenteeism, but some schools are dealing with a problem that's much greater. And we can focus and find out, why are young people, why are our students not going to those schools? And when you ask kids, they tell you. But we got to be willing to listen and be willing to do something about it, because young people will stop talking to you. If you keep asking them the same question, they give you the answer and you do nothing about it.
Yeah, I think that goes for a lot of our folks who are vulnerable, right? Ms. Chisolm, I'm going to ask you the same question around prevention and not operating in silos and collaboration.
Now, I want to say this because we have an elderly population that's coming into shelter because their spouses died. You know, they're now living on their own and they can no longer afford the rent. So if we had community services that could prevent them from having to come into shelter. You know, a lot of times they end up going to some of these outside organizations, and then they get told the best way to get a good apartment or a voucher is to go into shelter. And I'd like to see that they come up with an idea so that that doesn't have to be the route that our elder or our senior adults in New York City have to take in order to make it through. All shelters are not bad. And I just want to say that the shelter that I run, I say is, you know, I run the Hilton of shelters when it comes to New York City. But I also know that it's a shelter that, because of the way that the staff are poured into and the way that we pour into our clients, we make sure that they understand that being at that shelter is definitely a blessing. And we're here to help, to pour into, to empower, to teach, especially all of them that come in, because for different reasons they come into our shelters. But with that, we want to make sure that they understand that we are here because this is a part of a process for them to get out of here. I tell them all the time, my job is to put me out of a job. So help me out, you know? And so I work really hard with my staff, empowering my team, supporting my team, building up my team so that they can pour that compassion, that care, like Judy was talking about. You really have to care about the work that we do. You really have to get young people to come into the field to pour this into. But on the outside, we need to be able to put things in place that can prevent homelessness. They shouldn't have to come to shelter to get a voucher. We should be able to find these vouchers or make ways for these vouchers to be given to these people while they are in community. If you're over 60 and you have an income, you automatically qualify for a voucher. So why do they have to come to shelter? So I think that that would be one of the things that we need to definitely work on, is finding a community-based way that they can get these things in place before we allow evictions to take place.
Thank you. I think that's very, very important, right? Is like what can be done beforehand. And I thank you all for your answers around, especially around prevention. We have about 3 minutes left, and I have a question from an audience member that I'd really like to direct to Dr. Kohomban and Mr. Du. Um, there are nearly 8,000 CUNY students who are experiencing homelessness. What specifically is being done to ensure those students are actually being reached and supported? And do you think students are aware of these programs?
That's a great question. I know some developers like Ranger Capital that took one of their buildings in Long Island City and made it available for college students. I think there is an awareness, but not adequate. Look, housing is a real challenge in New York City. No question. It's not just students, but we have a lot of students that are caught up in it. I don't think there are, I am not aware of any special programs except some efforts by builders, and certainly CUNY and a lot of the other universities are attentive to this, and they're trying to do something about it. I don't see a quick solution.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that what happens is they sort of fall in between the cracks of, quote unquote, the emergency housing situation, because, college students sometimes can make it look a lot more. They can make it look as if they're doing okay. How many times have I gone, and I sit on your college's advisory, and I go, and I've heard the stories of some of the young people that are homeless while trying to go to school. I mean, and then there's food insecurity attached to that as well. I mean, there's so many variables that get attached. And I get calls where they say, do you have a room for us? And I don't think it's been addressed. And I don't think that we've looked hard enough at it. So, to the person who posed that question, I think it is something that we have to take a good hard look at, because that's a place where resiliency can be a real asset. And I mention that because I think with all of the populations we're talking about here, that's the first variable. What's the resiliency based upon the current conditions the individual is living in, to determine what we can do to provide them with the right services? That's what it comes down to. Because sometimes it only takes one thing to fix it.
Thank you so much for ending with that. I want to thank everyone. This was a really engaging and informative conversation. I hope that the audience, this was a great use of your time. I'm going to pass it back off to Jerry to get us closed out for the afternoon. And again, thank you to all of our panelists and audience members today.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. It was a pleasure just listening and hearing all of the stuff that was happening. Ms. Chisolm, I'm gonna have to plagiarize your word of being the Hilton of shelters. I love that. And just to move us forward in the stuff where we're talking about, thank you to you, Jeremy. Thank you, Judy, Cedric, the great work that you're all doing. Thank you, Assemblymember Jordan Wright and his entire office for showing up. It's so important that everyone hears the work, especially all the things that's happening in Manhattan. If there are any resources or anything that's happening, we're going to collaborate and get all that information to share that out to all the audience members. The very next thing that I want to share out within HSNY, we also have a podcast, One Step Away, that is also going to be bringing out just different content that speaks to the work that's being done in the communities citywide as relates with homelessness and hunger. Followed by that, please put this on your date if you haven't already. We're going to be having our Scene 3 Symposium, which is Reimagining Affordable Housing and Development, June 25th. Again, mark your calendars, June 25th, Scene 3, a symposium, Reimagining Affordable Housing and Development. For more information, pull out your phone right now, kindly scan the QR code. You can see a list of all this information, as well as more things to come. So I'll give this a second. While that's happening, again, I want to give a strong, strong shout out to the Children's Village, the Common Pantry, YMCA, Assembly Member Jordan Wright's office. If you appreciated, you enjoyed, you heard something that made sense, that resonated, please pull up a like, a heart, put something up on the webinar. Let us know that you enjoyed it. This will be followed by a survey so that we can get feedback to continue to improve. Again, if you heard something that you liked, if something made sense, if you found a new resource that got a takeaway from this, definitely put out a heart or a like. And lastly, but not least, again, I'll say it again. Thank you, YMCA. Thank you, New York Common Pantry. Thank you, Children's Village. Thank you, Assemblymember Wright's office. And it's always good to be home at Housing Solutions of New York. Thank you all for joining. Together, we make a difference in our communities. Everyone, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.